I talked about imprint, whatever we go through in our early life, give us the sense that something is so important than others. So that's the point I said. If your father or mother is a dentist, you tend to be a dentist, lawyer to lawyer, so, and so forth. But depending on your references in early days could be dangerous, or even later in our life. You cannot depend on the situation ultimately because the situation is different for each person. So this is like a paradox. I mentioned it's good to have a good reference, even the bad one, if we can understand. But that requires a good judgment capability for each of us. So imprint, references, has to be carefully understood, reflecting on each person's specific situation. In other words, how much suffering, delusionary thought we have. And to notice that, as much as references are important, we have to have the ability to look at ourselves as the reference. And this is the most important one. And that's what I mentioned about the self-observation. Also, I mentioned about the mirror mind. If we have a mirror in front of us to see what's going on at the time, every moment. Because we may have a tendency, like I realize myself, that, this is a great reference, I better study, understand more. There's a danger of study more than, or it's like over-dependence on certain person. I have a case of Charlie Munger, great investor, but at 2 occasions I remember, I trusted him too much. So I made a mistake. Well, prior to that, maybe I trusted and it worked. And if these things happen, you start to blame that person as the cause of trouble, but not looking at myself. And we can play the game endlessly, having a reference and complain it or agree with it. And even very good reference, we have to be careful because of what I mentioned, because depending on the situation, the idea may not work. I mentioned about Charlie Munger and inversion. And I'm not going to go into detail, but even that great idea, there's another inversion of inversion, which is like not trusting him. And when he said, don't go where you die, that's quite right. But as in the case of Saichi, go where you die and still be able to live your life well. That's the inversion of inversion. Going over what Charlie Munger said. Let me time to explain, but it is about the ultimate level that basically you can say you don't trust anything except the law of nature. Not even Chadi manga cannot win this. And that's what I believe. And that's the danger again of Saichi. When I say that's the danger again, is that if I trust him truly beyond the law of nature, then that could be a problem. But in this case, I sense his action reflect on him following the law of nature, the compassion of Amida Buddha, believing in it. But let's say, for the sake of discussion, I follow him and I may misinterpret his point. There's always the chance. And when we have good reference, even that can become a troublesome case. Because we are using a mind and relying on something. Of course, we need to rely on the law of nature, and that's what he says. Or Amida Buddha be the case. So ultimately, we have to face to ourselves. And that is the point of self-reflection and the point of eye of Eckhart, Meister Eckhart. The eye through which I see God is the eye that God sees me. And since God doesn't have any substance that you can talk about or grab on, for that reason, you're letting go to get to the level of no self. So it's not the self with the reference, but self without the reference, so to speak, which is to say, you are there on your own. When you face death, you don't think about anything. And no thinking, no reliance. Maybe, let's call it maybe, a good reference. In certain situations, like playing the Go game, to learn certain specific movement may be considered as the right move at certain situation. But when the situation changes, it may not apply. So your mind has to be empty. Use the logic, use the reference, but not to be used by the reference. That's what I think. But again, be careful when I think. That's where emptiness, or Saichi called koku, empty of sky, blue sky, is maybe said as the most important, because that's the original state of being as the reference. That's the root of who we truly are. And that's even more than the reference, that's what it is. No thinking. Lao Tzu said, when the problem is, stop thinking. Stop looking for reference. You can use the reference, but you have to stop. And that's the awakened state, beyond the human mind. Not the human mind with reference, but beyond any references. You can say reference about God if the God is defined as the laws of nature which you cannot grasp by your mind. So that's the paradox. So what does that mean? As I said, self-observation, the mirror mind. Mind become quiet. So you see what your mind is doing. That's what probably is the ultimate reference of who you are. Know yourself. Not knowing someone else's reference. That's what it is.